XDefiant is almost here, according to Mark Rubin at least. And as early as it might be, I think it's time to discuss who the next factions come to the game could be. So today, let's ask the question, who or what could be the upcoming factions in XDefiant? Before we start throwing around ideas, we need to look at the current factions in the game. With that, we can then look at the other Ubisoft games and their associated factions that may fit into XDefiant. Currently, we have the Cleaners from The Division, the Phantoms from Ghost Recon, DedSec from Watch Dogs, Libertad from Far Cry 6, and Echelon from my favorite series, Splinter Cell. Some of the games listed already have a multitude of different factions in them, like how Ghost Recon has the Phantoms, the Ghosts, and the most recent addition of the Wolves in Breakpoint. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but as I was editing this, I went and watched the XDefiant reveal and realized that the Outcasts and the Wolves were originally in XDefiant, a part of our main lineup. The Wolves were originally the Phantoms, literally the same gadgets and abilities, and the Outcasts were our healers, which is what Libertad is now. Not sure if we'll ever get these factions back in the game, but considering they were shown off and fully modeled, it's possible we'll get them in the future with different abilities. Okay, back to the video. And The Division has more factions to choose from, all of them have different abilities that could make them potential candidates. But in this discussion, we're not going to simply bring up the factions that may just show up, we're also going to go over abilities they could bring to the game if they were added. So let's start with the big fish first, The Division. Ubisoft's The Division has multiple different factions within it, so there's a chance for more factions to be brought into XDefiant straight from the Division series. However, because of the amount of different factions that the Division has, we're only going to talk about 4 of them, but these 4 are going to be split into 2, as they are similar to one another in their own way. First up, we have the Black Tusk and the Last Man Battalion, or LMB for short. These two are similar in their background and their fighting style in game. It differs when we look at their gadgets and how they're used. Specifically, if we were to go based on gadgets alone, Black Tusk wins by default. They have a few more things in their arsenal that makes them stand out compared to the LMB. We don't have to look far to see gadgets that could be a great addition and make the game interesting, like a mini tank that can roam and be repaired, a jammer system to disrupt their abilities, or even a grenade launcher. Both factions have some sort of grenadier variant, either throwing grenades or launching them out of a noob tube. Would it be annoying? Maybe. It just depends on how you view and play the game. Even though Black Tusk does have the better gear, they don't really stand out unlike the LMB, especially in a game like XDefiant where seeing what your opponent is using just based on visuals is going to be key in order to win that gunfight or match. But let's move on to the next 2 factions, the Hunters and the Division itself. Now, why these 2 together? Because their gadgets are identical. It quite literally comes down to playstyle and how they fight.
It also looks because the Hunters look pretty damn cool.
For these 2 specifically, it's a pretty close call. The Hunters and the Division use the same tech. Hunters are just a bit more ruthless. Division agents are more strategic in some way, but in a fight against the Hunter, they're either toe-to-toe or one has an advantage over the other. There really isn't an in-between. But in terms of using gadgets for XDefiant, we have the entire Shade tech list to choose from. Seeker mines, assault drones, turrets, chem launchers, and more. Both of these factions can fit pretty easily. I'd personally like to see the Hunters, because I like how they look, but I'd still take the Division too. As long as their characters look good and their gadgets are fun to use, then I'm good with anything. Next up, Ghost Recon. I think this one will be easy to talk about. However, not the easiest in this whole video, but we'll get to that later. When it comes to the Ghost Recon series of games, there are 2 factions that come to mind that could be brought into XDefiant besides the Ghosts, and they are the Wolves and the Bodarks. Now, these 2 in particular aren't too different from each other in background. Both have members who served in the military, they fight the Ghosts, so on and so forth. These 2 factions are easily recognizable, the Wolves wearing their iconic long coats and their interestingly designed helmets, while the Bodarks are basically Russian special forces. I honestly cannot say too much about what gadgets they'd bring to the table if they were to be added, since we don't really see them using anything special. They are basically elite soldiers just like the Ghosts. This isn't stopping them from having unique skills, gadgets, and abilities though, but because Ghost Recon is more of a modern tactical shooter, there really isn't that much fancy tech in game to maybe use as an ability for these factions in XDefiant, besides maybe the Ghost's optic camouflage. You could say that the Ghosts can have their optic camo from Future Soldier if they were to be added, which the Bodarks also have in Breakpoint, but we already have a faction who has that. Whatever the ability or gadgets would be, it would have to be specific and unique to that faction, something that faction would most likely use as an advantage in a gunfight, just like how the Wolves use a drone to find targets, jam their abilities, and then swarm their location. Now let's move on to probably the easiest part of the discussion, Assassin's Creed. There's a part of me that really wants to have the Assassins show up on XDefiant, but then I have to realize they aren't really special. In fact, if the Assassins were to be brought into XDefiant, I think their ultimate ability would probably be the Hidden Blade as a one-hit kill. Cool to see, and it adds a faction that's high risk and high reward, but how do you make it so it can fight against the other factions without copying or being boring? If we're being realistic, the Templars could show up easily and would make a lot of sense. The modern day Templars, Abstergo, have all the money possible to do anything they want. They can afford a private army. I can see a Templar faction wearing tactical gear with Abstergo branding all over it. In fact, it's been done as a cosmetic for Assassin's Creed already. As for the gadgets, well, that's where it gets a bit weird. Unless they have some technology in the modern day that we haven't seen them use yet, there isn't much to talk about. They could be given prototype weapons to use as their faction-specific ability, but it's hard to say what it would be. Whatever it would be, I would love to see them more as a counter faction, being able to counter specific factions or abilities with their gadgets or ultimate ability. Something that DedSec can do, but theirs is AoE based. I think we should have another faction do something similar to DedSec, but maybe more widespread, or even targeting specific players and abilities. Just as DedSec is able to hijack deployed abilities, I think an Abstergo agent should be able to just disable it for a temporary amount of time to give them an advantage. Whatever the ability is, it can't break the balance of XDefiant too much, nor should it make the players rely solely on their gadgets. Now, let's hit the last game and/or series, Rainbow Six. I don't really have too much to say on this specific series. I can see most of the gadgets currently in Rainbow Six Siege being brought into XDefiant, but not all. This is mainly due to the differences in both games. One's more of a competitive shooter, and the other is an arcade arena shooter. Not all of the gadgets would transfer over well or work properly at all with the changing gameplay style. That doesn't mean that the team of Rainbow Six can't show up, but the gadgets they use would either have to be changed to fit the style of XDefiant or would have to be made from scratch. When it comes to current operator abilities, I can see them adding Jaeger's trophy system and Valkyrie's cameras. Jaeger's trophy system would allow players to set up a more defensive position when playing objectives. To balance it, I think players should only be able to place one trophy system and have a cooldown to place another. Should the previous system still exist and the player places another one down, they would destroy the previous one. As for Valkyrie, I think her cameras can act as a sensor to highlight enemy positions and where they are currently for a short amount of time as long as they pass by the camera, highlighting that player for about 1 to 3 seconds or so. I also think players should be able to deploy 2 cameras with a cooldown starting right after they've thrown the first one, and once the camera highlights a player who has passed by it, the camera is then destroyed. And I think that should the cooldown of said gadget fully recharge, the previous camera out there would be destroyed as well. Either that, or the camera should have a time for how long they can exist. Should this be a thing, it should be somewhere around 5 to 10 seconds. Honestly, I could see some balancing issues with operator abilities from Rainbow Six Siege. I can see some now with my own picks. But then again, I never said my ideas are going to be good or balanced. And that's it. There's probably more out there that I could have talked about, but didn't for the sake of my sanity, and also I probably just didn't remember they existed. So if I missed anything or anyone that could be a great addition, please tell me below. In fact, if you have any ideas as to who or what could be added, why not add that down there too? Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm probably going to make more videos like this, so hey, new content for you. Anyways, I'll see you later.